"We needed someone who fits our culture," Trevor remarked, smiling contentedly as he leaned back in his leather chair. "I'm sure you understand." With the quarterly operations report I had completed still in my hands, I gazed at him across the desk. "You're putting Greg Wilson in my place? He has absolutely no managerial experience or industrial experience." Trevor said, "Greg brings fresh perspectives," as he straightened his expensive tie. "Northwest Timber Products has changed throughout time. We require leadership that supports our new course." I struggled to maintain my composure as I responded, "I've managed operations here for 12 years. We are at an all-time high in our efficiency measures. 94% of clients are retained. What specifically needs to change?" Trevor gritted his teeth. "This has nothing to do with your performance, Clara. You do what you do really well. However, Greg and I have a more dynamic vision for the company's future." I am 42 years old and the operations manager for Northwest Timber Products in Spokane, Washington. My name is Clara Novak, or until now at least I was. Streamlining our timber processing processes, putting sustainable forestry practices into place, and cultivating partnerships with clients throughout the Pacific Northwest are all aspects of my career that I have devoted to our firm. "When do you want me to leave?" I inquired, my mind already figuring out employment chances, health insurance continuance, and severance. "The changeover will take 2 weeks. Today is Greg's first day. He'll follow you until the 15th, when you're done." Trevor signaled the end of our meeting. "I've requested that HR put up a substantial severance package. We appreciate the years you have served." Despite my stomach churning, I nodded and got up to go, keeping my composure and dignity intact. "Oh, and Clara, let's keep this positive with the team," Trevor said as I turned to head for the door. "I've told others you're looking for new opportunities." He had, of course, told everyone I was leaving before I did. I discovered a confidentiality agreement and severance terms in an email from Diane in HR when I returned to my work. A message from my helper, Thomas, appeared while I was scanning the paper. "What's happening?" Greg, our new operations manager, was recently presented by Trevor, claimed to be departing. I was about to reply when I saw Greg himself coming. Tall, tanned, and sporting a golf polo underneath his hurriedly put-on coat, he smiled casually and held out his hand. "It's wonderful to meet you at last, Clara. I learned so much about you from Trevor." Trevor, holding a champagne flute, was observing from the conference room behind him. Before turning to chuckle at something the VP of Sales had said, he lifted it slightly towards me. "I'm sure he has," I said, giving Greg a solid handshake. "Let me show you around." We were walking around the factory floor when I became more concerned that Greg was referring to our biggest client by the incorrect name, couldn't read our processing charts, and didn't know the difference between pine and cedar. This wasn't only a substitute. Everything that I had constructed was being dismantled. I joined Northwest Timber Products, fresh out of my MBA program, initially as a process analyst. The company was struggling then, inefficient operations, high waste percentages, and a reputation for missed delivery dates. I worked my way up through various positions, eventually becoming operations manager under the previous CEO, Harold Bergman. Harold recognized my talents for organization and problem solving. He mentored me, challenged me, and ultimately trusted me to revamp our entire production system. Together, we transformed Northwest from a struggling mid-sized lumber supplier into one of the most respected sustainable timber operations in the region. When Harold announced his retirement last year, the board conducted an external search for his replacement. They settled on Trevor Rhodes, who came from a larger competitor with promises to modernize and disrupt the traditional timber industry. I had reservations about his flashy style, but was determined to work collaboratively for the company's benefit. At first, Trevor seemed interested in understanding our operations. He scheduled lengthy meetings with each department head, asked thoughtful questions, and praised our efficiency metrics. During his first board presentation, I began to think my concerns had been unfounded. Then small changes began. Trevor started bringing in consultants who knew nothing about timber, but spoke confidently about corporate culture and brand identity. He renovated the executive floor while postponing critical equipment upgrades I'd been requesting for months. He instituted mandatory team-building activities that pulled workers off the production floor during our busiest periods. Still, I adapted. I adjusted schedules to accommodate his new initiatives while maintaining productivity. I translated his buzzword-filled directives into actionable steps for my team. I defended these changes to skeptical employees who trusted my judgment. What I didn't know was that Trevor had been undermining me behind the scenes. I learned later that he'd been telling board members I was resistant to change, stuck in old methodologies. He'd started playing golf with several key board members, and with Greg Wilson, a former college classmate with no experience in our industry. I maintained my professionalism, focusing on what I could control: operations, efficiency, client relationships. When our quarterly numbers showed record productivity despite the disruptions, I thought my position was secure. Results would speak for themselves. The week before my termination, I noticed Trevor and Greg having lunch in Trevor's office. They seemed to be reviewing documents, my operations reports, I assumed, as part of Trevor's ongoing department evaluations. I even prepared additional materials for them, wanting to ensure they understood our production processes fully. Harold called me that same week. He'd heard rumors about leadership changes from his old industry contacts. "Watch your back, Clara," he warned. "Trevor's been asking strange questions about the extent of your authority." I thanked him for the concern but dismissed it as retired CEO paranoia. Harold was protective of the company and of me. Surely, Trevor wouldn't replace his most effective manager without cause. I was wrong. My first day of the transition was excruciating. Greg followed me everywhere, making notes on a leather-bound pad, but asking no substantive questions. At our morning operations meeting, Trevor introduced Greg as the new visionary leader who will take our processes to the next level. My team looked between us in confusion, their expressions ranging from shock to anger on my behalf. "I'll be available these next 2 weeks to ensure a smooth handover," I said, maintaining my composure. "Let's make sure our production targets don't slip during this transition." After the meeting, several team members stopped by my office privately to express their disbelief. Thomas, my assistant for 7 years, was particularly upset. "This is ridiculous," he fumed. "Greg asked me if lumber comes from pine trees or pine bushes. He literally doesn't know what wood is." "He'll learn," I said automatically, though I didn't believe it. By mid-afternoon, I was reviewing our inventory management system with Greg, explaining the custom software I'd helped develop to track materials from forest to finished product. "This seems unnecessarily complicated," Greg commented, suppressing a yawn. "At my last company, we used a simple Excel spreadsheet for everything." "What company was that?" I asked, genuinely curious since Trevor had been vague about Greg's background. "Oh, I managed my family's car wash business for a while," he replied casually. "Different industry, but business is business, right?" I stared at him, momentarily speechless. A car wash? He was replacing me with someone whose experience was running a car wash? That evening, as I was preparing to leave, I overheard Trevor and Greg laughing in the executive lounge. The door was partially open, and their voices carried clearly. "She's still explaining systems, like I'm actually going to use them," Greg chuckled. "Wait till she finds out we're outsourcing half the operations management to that consulting firm." Trevor's response made my blood run cold. "The board doesn't know that part yet. Let's get Clara out the door first, then present the consultancy as a cost-saving measure. Between your salary and the consultants, we're still spending more, but the board only sees the headcount reduction. And you're sure about my compensation package? That signing bonus seemed almost too good to be true. Worth every penny to have someone who will support my vision instead of questioning everything with her efficiency metrics and sustainable practices. I stepped away silently, my mind racing. This wasn't just about replacing me with a golf buddy. They were dismantling my entire department, potentially jeopardizing the operations I'd spent years perfecting, and they were misleading the board about the financial implications. Back in my office, I sat heavily in my chair, staring at the operations manual I'd been updating for Greg. 12 years of dedication reduced to a 2-week transition that was clearly just for show. My team would likely be next on the chopping block once the consultants identified redundancies. I felt a complex mix of emotions: anger, betrayal, concern for my team, worry for the company itself. Northwest wasn't just my employer, it had been my professional home. As I packed my bag to leave, I noticed the board meeting agenda for next month sitting in my inbox, sent to me by mistake since I would no longer be employed when it occurred. I read it slowly, an idea beginning to form. Perhaps this transition wouldn't go exactly as Trevor planned. The next morning, I arrived early to find Diane from HR waiting by my office. "Clara, I need the signed severance agreement today," she said apologetically. "Trevor's asking for it." I had deliberately not signed the document yet, using the time to review my options. "I'm still consulting with my attorney," I explained. "The non-compete clause seems unusually restrictive." Diane lowered her voice. "Between us, I agree, but Trevor insists it's non-negotiable." "I understand. I'll have my decision by tomorrow." As Diane left, my desk phone rang. It was Elaine Robinson, a board member who had worked closely with Harold before his retirement. "Clara, are you free for lunch today?" she asked without preamble. "I've just heard some disturbing news." Hope flickered briefly. Perhaps the board would intervene. "I can make time," I replied. We met at a small cafe well away from the office. Elaine, in her 60s, with a no-nonsense demeanor that had made her successful in the timber industry, got straight to the point. "Trevor told the executive committee you requested to leave," she said, stirring her coffee. "Said you were burned out and recommended Greg as your replacement. Several of us were surprised, but he presented it as a done deal." "That's not what happened," I said, careful to state facts without emotional coloring. "He terminated my position and had already hired Greg before informing me." Elaine's expression hardened. "I suspected as much. Trevor's been making unilateral decisions despite board governance requirements. Unfortunately, he's convinced the board chair, James, that he needs operational freedom to modernize the company. So there's nothing to be done. Not officially. Not yet. James won't call a special meeting just for a personnel change, even at your level. Our next full board meeting isn't for 2 weeks. My shoulders slumped slightly. 2 weeks was after my last day. However, Elaine continued, "I'd like to invite you to that meeting as my guest. It's unusual but not unprecedented. You've presented to the board before, and I can request your attendance for questions on operations during the transition." "Trevor won't like that." "Trevor doesn't need to know until the day of the meeting," she replied with a hint of steel in her voice. "In the meantime, document everything, especially any plans that contradict what the board has approved." I left lunch feeling cautiously optimistic. If I could present the facts directly to the board, perhaps Trevor's plans would be scrutinized more carefully. That afternoon, I met with Trevor to discuss the transition timeline. I decided to test the waters. "I've been thinking about the severance agreement," I began. "I'm concerned about the non-compete restrictions." Trevor's smile didn't reach his eyes. "They're standard for executives. You know too much about our operations to allow you to work for competitors. Then perhaps we should discuss an adjustment to the compensation, given the restrictions' impact on my employment prospects." His expression hardened. "The package is generous as is. If you're unhappy with it, we could revisit whether a severance is offered at all. The threat was clear. I nodded and retreated, deciding to sign the agreement while I considered my options. Later that day, I overheard Greg on a call in the conference room, the door ajar. The transition's going fine. She suspects nothing. Yes, the outsourcing proposal is ready. No, the board won't see the full cost implications until it's implemented. When he emerged, I was reviewing production reports at a nearby desk. He startled slightly upon seeing me. "How much did you hear?" he demanded, his friendly facade dropping momentarily. "Hear what?" I replied innocently. "I was just updating these reports for you." Greg seemed appeased but remained wary. That evening, I discovered my email access had been restricted. "In preparation for your departure, 2 weeks early." When I called it, they confirmed the directive had come from Trevor directly. The message was clear. They didn't trust me with information, even during the transition period. Whatever Trevor and Greg were planning, they didn't want me to see it. I needed to find out what it was, and quickly. With my email access restricted, I had to get creative. I still had physical access to the building and my regular systems. They needed me to train Greg, after all. During our morning review of client accounts, I suggested we look at the upcoming contract renewals. "We have Wilson Construction's renewal next month," I explained, pulling up the file. "They've been with us for 8 years and account for 12% of our revenue." Greg shifted uncomfortably. "Trevor mentioned Wilson. I think he's handling that personally." "That's unusual. The operations team typically manages our major account renewals since we coordinate the production schedules," I said, watching his reaction carefully. "New processes," Greg replied vaguely. "Part of our modernization." Later, I casually asked Janice from accounting about the Wilson contract while we waited for coffee. In the break room, "Oh, didn't you hear?" she whispered. "Trevor's brother-in-law just became their new purchasing director. Trevor took him golfing last weekend." The pieces started coming together. I spent my lunch break in the company archives, reviewing board minutes from Trevor's hiring. His mandate had been clear: maintain Northwest's industry-leading sustainable practices while improving profitability. Nothing about outsourcing operations or restructuring client relationships. That afternoon, I received a text from Harold. "Heard Wilson Construction is getting a Sweethort deal from Northwest. Price point 15% below market. Is this true?" If Trevor was slashing prices for his brother-in-law's company while cutting experienced staff, he wasn't just restructuring. He was potentially compromising the company's financial stability for personal connections. I needed proof, but with my email restricted, I couldn't access the new contract drafts. Then I remembered. Thomas still had full system access. "I need to train Greg on the contract management system," I told Thomas. "Can you pull up the latest Wilson draft for us?" Thomas did so without question, and I quickly scanned the document while ostensibly showing Greg the system's features. The pricing was indeed significantly below our standard rates, with unusually generous payment terms. Most concerning was a clause granting Wilson Construction preferred allocation during supply shortages, something we'd never offered any client. "Is this the final version?" I asked Greg casually. "Trevor's reviewing it one more time," he replied. "He's really focused on securing this renewal." I nodded, memorizing the key details before closing the file. "Just wanted to show you where to find these in the system." That evening, I called Elaine. "Trevor's giving preferential terms to his brother-in-law's company," I explained. "Below-market pricing and supply guarantees that could impact our other clients." "Can you prove it?" Elaine asked. "I've seen the contract draft, but I don't have a copy." "We need documentation, Clara. The board won't act on hearsay." I hesitated, then made a decision. "I think there's more happening. The outsourcing plan Greg mentioned might connect to this. If Trevor's redirecting resources to favored clients while cutting internal expertise, it could compromise our operations and sustainability commitments. Elaine finished. The board would definitely need to review such fundamental changes. The next morning, Trevor called me into his office. His expression was cold. "It's come to my attention that you've been accessing files outside your transition duties," he said without preamble. "Given your reluctance to embrace these changes, we think it's best to end your employment immediately rather than continuing the TUI transition." I felt surprisingly calm. "On what grounds?" "We don't need grounds with at-will employment, as you know. But if you prefer, I can cite breach of confidentiality or failure to support company directives." "I see. And the severance package still available, provided you sign today, with the addition of a non-disparagement clause." He slid a revised agreement across the desk. "Otherwise, we terminate for cause, and you'll receive nothing." It was a calculated move designed to silence me before the board meeting. Trevor was clearly worried about what I might have discovered. I had a decision to make: sign and take the money, or reject the agreement and lose my severance, but maintain my ability to speak freely to the board. What Trevor didn't know was that I had already made my choice. "I'll need time to review the new agreement," I said, taking the document without committing today. "Clara, I need your decision and signature today," Trevor insisted. I nodded non-committed and returned to my office to find Greg already there, examining my files. "Just getting familiar with everything," he said without a hint of embarrassment. "Since it seems your departure might be accelerated, take whatever you need," I replied, beginning to pack my personal items. "Though you might want to actually read our sustainable forestry protocols before your meeting with the environmental compliance team this afternoon." Greg looked blank. "What meeting?" "It's on the operations calendar, quarterly review of our sustainability metrics. The team will expect you to explain any variances in our replanting schedules or carbon offset calculations." Panic flashed across his face, and he quickly left, presumably to find Trevor. I took advantage of his absence to call Thomas into my office. "I need your help," I said quietly, "but it could put you in an awkward position." Thomas didn't hesitate. "What do you need?" "Access to the shared drive for 1 hour and copies of the consultant proposal Trevor's been developing, the outsourcing plan." "I can do better than that," Thomas replied. "I've been backing up all unusual document requests since you told me you were leaving." He pulled a flash drive from his pocket. "Trevor had me print the proposal yesterday, but didn't know I saved a copy. It's all here, the outsourcing details, the new pricing structures, everything." I stared at him in surprise. He shrugged. "You trained me to maintain records of all operational changes. This seemed important." I quickly reviewed the files. The outsourcing proposal was worse than I'd imagined. It would replace our experienced operations team with overseas consultants who had no background in timber or sustainability practices. The projected savings only appeared positive because they excluded transition costs and potential compliance issues. Most alarmingly, the proposal indicated implementation would begin immediately after my departure, without waiting for board approval. I also found the complete Wilson construction contract, with Trevor's brother-in-law's name clearly indicated, plus similar preferential deals for 2 other companies connected to Trevor's personal network. "Thomas, if Trevor asks, you never gave me this." "Gave you what?" he replied with a wink. "I'm just helping you pack." By afternoon, I'd copied the essential documents and returned the flash drive to Thomas. I then called Elaine. "I have what we need," I told her. "But Trevor's trying to force me out immediately with a non-disparagement clause." "Don't sign anything," she advised. "I'll talk to James. This is exactly the kind of unilateral action the board needs to know about." An hour later, Trevor stormed into my office, face flushed with anger. "What did you say to Elaine Robinson?" "That you were asking me to sign a revised severance agreement." I replied calmly, She just called James, demanding a special executive committee meeting tomorrow about your termination. I kept my expression neutral. That's her prerogative as a board member. Trevor leaned across my desk. Sign the agreement now, Clara. Walk away with your severance and your reputation intact. Push this further and I'll make sure everyone in the industry knows you were terminated for cause. It was a serious threat in our specialized field. I could sign and secure my financial cushion or risk my professional reputation by fighting. I'll have my answer for you tomorrow morning, I said, buying time. Trevor left unsatisfied, and I spent the evening preparing a detailed presentation of everything I discovered, the outsourcing plan, the preferential contracts, the misrepresentations to the board. I organized the documents chronologically, highlighting where Trevor's actions contradicted his board-approved mandate. By morning I was ready, but when I arrived at the office, security stopped me at the entrance. "I'm sorry, Miss Novak. Your access has been revoked." Trevor had made his move. Now I needed to make mine. "Miss Novak." I turned to find James Werner, the board chair, approaching the security desk. "Elaine mentioned you might have trouble accessing the building." He nodded to the guard. "She's with me for the executive committee meeting." The guard looked uncertain but couldn't refuse the board chair. James escorted me to the executive floor, explaining in hushed tones that Trevor had called an emergency meeting of his own, apparently to formalize my termination before the committee could intervene. Fortunately, board governance supersedes executive authority in personnel matters involving department heads, James said. Elaine was quite insistent we review the situation properly. When we entered the boardroom, Trevor's confident expression faltered visibly. Greg sat beside him, looking uncomfortable, as Elaine and 2 other committee members arranged their materials. "Clara," Trevor recovered quickly. "This is an executive meeting. I don't think I invited her." James interrupted. "Given the serious concerns raised about operational changes, we need her expertise." "What concerns?" Trevor's voice was sharp. "I've simply made a standard personnel change to align with our modernization strategy." Elaine gestured to me. "Clara, please share what you've discovered." With calm precision, I presented the documents I'd prepared. I explained how the outsourcing plan contradicted our sustainability commitments. I highlighted the preferential contracts with Trevor's connections, displaying the pricing disparities alongside our standard terms. I showed how the consultant costs, when fully calculated, actually increased expenses rather than creating savings. Most importantly, I concluded that none of these fundamental operational changes were presented to the board for approval, despite governance requirements for strategies impacting our core business model and environmental commitments. Trevor's face changed from contemptuous to worried to overtly antagonistic during my presentation. Greg avoided making eye contact with anybody as he gazed at the table. After I was done, James looked at Trevor. "Is this true? Are these modifications being implemented without board approval?" "I was planning to present the complete strategy at the next regular meeting," Trevor said. "Clara is selectively sharing information out of context because she's disgruntled about being replaced." I said, "The documents speak for themselves," as I passed copies of Trevor's signed directives, including your direction to start implementation prior to the next board meeting, across the table. James's face grew more serious as he went over the paperwork. "I believe we should continue this conversation with the committee in private, Trevor. I appreciate your thoroughness, Clara. Wait outside, please." Trevor's stare followed me out of the boardroom. I had done the right thing for the business I had helped create, but I had little control over what came next. James invited me to join them when he came out of the boardroom 3 hours later. Greg and Trevor were conspicuously missing. James said, "The committee has made several decisions," after I took a seat. "With immediate effect, Trevor's job has been terminated. As I requested, the outsourcing plan, rescinded entirely, and Greg Wilson will not be taking over as operations manager. Elaine affirmed, as are the preferential contracts that hadn't yet been executed. James cleared his throat. The committee would like to offer you your job back, Clara, with the proper pay and authority modifications. We really regret the inconvenience Trevor's actions caused and acknowledge the value you provide to Northwest Timber Products. I gave the offer great thought. 2 of Northwest's rivals had contacted me during the last 2 weeks, one of which would result in a big promotion. I appreciate the offer, I eventually concluded, but I believe it's time for me to look into other options. However, in order to stabilize operations and assist you in finding a qualified replacement, I would be prepared to remain for a thorough transition time. Despite his dejected expression, James nodded in agreement. During the transition, we'll create suitable conditions for a consulting agreement. Would 3 months be enough? It was a substantial offer, and I would have time to think things through. That would be acceptable. Elaine led me to the lift as the conference came to an end. Trevor didn't go quietly, she revealed. He threatened legal action, claiming you had violated confidentiality. James told him that if he pursued such accusations, a thorough audit of his choices since joining Northwest would be conducted. After Trevor was hauled out, I gave a little smile, and Greg went right away. Apparently, operating a car wash didn't qualify him for this level of corporate governance. 2 weeks later, I agreed to take a job as operations director for a company that makes sustainable construction materials, where I would be in charge of their foray into engineered timber products. In the end, a few of my teammates joined me there. With a renewed dedication to the ecological principles I helped create, Northwest Timber Products is carrying on with its business as usual. That doing the right thing may result in unexpected new beginnings is evidenced by the fact that I still consult with them from time to time. Sometimes what you do after you enter a room makes a stronger statement than what you say when you are shown the door.